So just before we begin, I should just say that spoiler warning for all the films we're about to say. So we'll say the film before we start talking about it, but we are going to be talking about plot spoilers all the way through. So if you haven't seen the film, probably go watch it before you finish the rest of the podcast.
Or skip.
Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Real Film Podcast. My name's Phil.
And I'm Corey.
And today we're going to be talking about our 20 best films from the decade of the 2010s. So this is films from 2010 to 2019, because 2020 isn't in the decade, as someone once tried to tell me. So this is just a list of what we think is the best from those 10 years. There will definitely be films omitted from that, but we're going to be taking this, splitting this up into multiple podcasts, and we'll dedicate a whole one to the honourable mentions, because it's been a really good decade, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would. It's, maybe that's just because it's when we started getting into film, but I would say it's one of the strongest ones that I've watched a lot of films from, I guess.
Yeah. It's the one where we've watched the most cinema, for sure, so that definitely helps. So we're going to kick it off with a film from 2010, which was Black Swan, which is arguably Darren Aronofsky's best film. I think we've had this conversation before that I don't know if there's another film that you could immediately jump to and say, yes, that's his best one. There's other films I really like, but I think Black Swan, stands head and shoulders above most of his films.
Definitely. I don't think there's really any argument about it. I know that obviously Requiem for a Dream is, a lot of people love it. And but the ones that jump out to me are always Black Swan and The Wrestler.
Yeah, The Wrestler was mine, yeah.
Yeah, but Black Swan is fantastic. And I rewatched it like 2 days ago. And I was a bit cautious when we initially put it on the list because I hadn't seen it in a while. I just remember loving it, but rewatching it is so good. It's so good.
And I think it's not just a career high for Aronofsky. I think it's a really good career high for Natalie Portman as well.
Yeah.
I think we both are in the same agreement that she's a really great actress, but she hasn't had that many chances to be like that really great next level. Do you know what I mean? She hasn't had many chances to bring that incredible performance out, which I think Aronofsky brings out this astounding performance from her, especially that last sort of half an hour or so is so wildly intense and so engaging. And I just don't think it would work if you didn't have someone with such a strong performance in it. I think it would fall flat if she wasn't at the same sort of level as the filmmaking around her,
Yeah, definitely. I think especially when we're building the character and she's just this like princess who's basically on the verge of tears every time there's any kind of conflict, and she's very, I guess, pink because there's just so much pink involved. But it's perfect, and she is perfect in it, and especially that last half an hour when she starts to turn into the Black Swan, it's just phenomenal.
Yeah, and like on the rewatching as well, I felt like you appreciate Mila Kunis's character a lot more as well. Like she's another person who I don't think has had quite as much chance to show her ability, but she's such a liking and charismatic just person in general that I think going across from Portman sort of slowly descending into insanity is like a really I think she's the perfect juxtaposition to Portman.
Yeah, I think she's like, I guess she's almost like the movie star, she's just the very likable movie star. And you're right, she's never really had that opportunity to kind of prove herself. But because I remember when I first watched it, I never really took that much notice of Mila Kunis's performance because Natalie Portman is so powerful in it. But I think on rewatch, I think definitely, yeah, she wasn't nominated for an Oscar. But I would say she probably could have been, definitely.
Yeah, and I think as well, yeah.
So why did you, because I know this was like one of your three, like this was your choice, and obviously I'm fully with it, but like, why did you pick this over like other films to be on the list?
I think it's like with many films on this list that I chose. There's a certain level of originality to it. So when you think a film about ballet, this is not what you imagine at all. I
No,
think
that's
because
very true.
it's not. I think that's probably the wrong way of saying it as well, because it's not a film about ballet. It's a film about
Yeah,
identity and obsession, like complete just devotion and obsession to perfection. Um, and I think it just jumps out as me. I think people forget it a little bit because it's not a Paul Thomas Anderson film or anything like that, or the other films we'll get to on the list. It's not one that but like I think that's because it's been a while now. This is obviously the earliest film on the list by quite some way. It's 10 years old now, or probably nearly 11
that's
actually.
mental.
Yeah, and I do think that's crazy, and I just think that it falls by the wayside. And I think it is completely original. I think it's stunning, the performances. I think it's superbly directed by an excellent director, like a modern director. Um, I think something as well is it's probably some of Aronofsky's best like shot sequences as well, especially with like all the stuff with the mirrors um, in the practice hall. I just think it's a really really great um, and people don't jump to it enough. I think so.
Yeah, I think with the how he shoots it as well, he puts so much energy into the camera work during the ballet scenes that
Absolutely.
it's not really about like the delicacy of doing ballet. It's about the intensity of that search for perfection, and I think
Mm,
that's what makes it different. And yeah, I mean, there's so many scenes in it as well that are kind of horrific to watch as well.
absolutely, absolutely. I'm just going to use the point of originality to segue into the next film, actually, which is The Place Beyond the Pines, which is the Derek Kieran-France film. And I'm a huge fan of Derek Kieran-France's film. We could have very easily put Blue Valentine in this. But I think there's something about Place Beyond the Pines that is just, again, it's the originality of the narrative. So the way that it kind of just segments into like three distinct sort of almost generational segments of the film, and I just think it's so uniquely written and so brilliantly written. It's completely heartbreaking as well. You wouldn't expect to see what actually happened, with Ryan Gosling. I mean, talk about Ryan Gosling, what a decade Gosling's had. The fact that the guy hasn't won or barely even been nominated for an Oscar in this decade is shocking, because the films he's come out with in this 10 years is just outstanding.
Yeah,
But
he's had a very good choice of films in this decade,
he
definitely.
has he has, which is pretty shocking considering the films he had. Not that he was choosing awful films before it, but he didn't exactly have the most stellar career up until, I don't know when the turning point would have been. It probably would have been um, Blue Valentine. What was that? 2009.
2010.
2010. Yeah. I think up until that point he'd had an okay career, but yeah, this is a excellent turn from him too. I love how Ken France shoots his films as well. He shoots on 35mm, and you can just tell it just has this gorgeous sort of almost nostalgic look to it. It's so cinematic and so beautiful. I mean, even from the opening shot, is that you get the really close up on the cage of the motorbikes going round that big sort of ball, and it
Yeah,
just takes that really really long track out, and I just think it sets the tone for the film. And yeah, I absolutely love it.
yeah. I remember. I think maybe I was 15 when I first watched it. This is sort of when I started watching movies, because before I hadn't watched any good movies other than Lord of the Rings. Um, and I think I just remember watching it and thinking I didn't realize you could do that, like narratively, like
Yeah,
structurally. I didn't realize that was allowed, basically. And it's really effective. It's gorgeously shot as well. Yeah, you're right. And I mean, Gosling. I've heard he's got his. I know he's got his critics. A few people I've spoke to don't particularly like Ryan Gosling. I don't really understand why.
those people are wrong.
Yeah,
I'm
those
kidding.
people are wrong. But yeah, definitely. I mean, maybe I haven't. Um, I think if if we were talking about Blue Valentine, I think A Place Beyond the Pines is probably better for me. But again, they're two very, very good films from a very good director.
They're very different as well. They're going for different things, aren't they? They're challenging different themes. Blue Valentine isn't, because it's the interesting thing about Place Me on the Pines. It's almost an epic of sorts. Do you know what I mean by
Yeah,
that? Like, because it does span a very long period of time, and it moves from Gosling to Bradley Cooper, who if you've never watched this film, you've never seen Bradley Cooper like this before. He's absolutely superb and then like moving from Bradley Cooper onto his son, I just think is a stroke of genius narratively. Yeah, and I think everyone's brilliant in it.
yeah. Speaking of good performances, the next one, it's a nice segue, is Blue is the Warmest Colour, French movie from 2013. Uh, I'm going to say the director's name and I'm going to get it wrong, and I apologise right now. It's Abdelatif Keshish, I believe. And I'm very sorry if I've mispronounced that. Yeah, 2013 romance about a girl called Adele who essentially is discovering her sexuality, and it's a coming of age tale, is what it is. And it won the Palme d'Or. I love it. I remember watching it for the first time. It's gorgeous, and it's all about the two performances, though. Like, it has to be. Like,
Yeah,
the two of the best performances I think I've ever seen. I would say Adele more, Adele Exarchopoulos. She's definitely, driving this film. It's like those little soft scenes. She's just perfect. She's very shy. She's very emotional, and she just nails it every time.
absolutely.
Um, but obviously, we've rewatched this recently, and I think the emotional scenes still hold that impact, really.
Absolutely. I had more resonance with the small scenes as well. Like the scenes that don't really affect the narrative all that much, like the two dinners that they have once they're together and they have dinners with the parents, they affected me a lot more than on my first watch. And I think it's just because there's such minor moments, they're just bringing that. So like when you go to the dinner with Emma, her parents already know about her sexuality. So like they're asking questions about Adele, and you have this really easy flowing discussion, and they don't approve of some of Emma's life choices, but they aren't prying too much. And then you go to the other side, and Adele's parents don't know about her sexuality, so they just think she's tutoring Adele in philosophy, and they're asking about a boyfriend, is he potentially a husband, and all this sort of stuff. And it's just little moments like that that tell you a lot, not just about the parents, but about the characters as well, and how much they're willing to reveal at this point in their life. Something just to piggyback off a point you said earlier about it being a coming of age as well. I totally agree. It is a coming of age drama, but because of the length of time that it spans, it becomes so much more than that as well. Because it goes into the sort of the young, or not the young, but like the early adult life of the pair as well. Do you know what I mean? It spends quite a lot of time with Adele as she has become a teacher. She's not just a teaching assistant anymore. Well, she's in high school when it starts, and by the end of it, she's a fully fledged teacher who served many years at a school. So I think it's a coming of age drama that becomes like almost um, like a life film. Do you know what I mean? It almost
Yeah,
spans like the same length of that a biopic would. That you follow them with such a long amount of time. I think it does that so like delicately as well. Like the amount of time it spans doesn't feel like you're taking huge jumps, and it's really interesting as well because it was only filmed over about 6 months. But when you compare the Adele from the start to Adele to the end, she might not look that different in her face, but the way she presents herself, and the way they dress her up and everything, it's more than enough to make her look aged enough. Because when you meet Emma for the first time, she's already pretty mature. So, but you see her go from this young adult mature to being a much more sort of like into this sort of level of artist that is like quite an adult artist. I just think it's so fascinating how it takes what could be just a coming of age film and turns it into so much more.
yeah, I agree. When I first watched it, I always thought it was kind of split up into three. Um, Maybe that's because it's 3 hours. I don't know, but I always
Yeah,
saw sort of three distinct parts to it. But I guess you're right. It spans so much time and it's done with so much subtlety that it's not really about 3 or 2 particular pieces of time. And like you said, physically, Adele has changed the way she's dressed, but she's also she's not afraid to put herself out there at this age
Yeah,
either.
absolutely.
She's such a quiet person, nervous because of all these you know attractions she's getting.
Yeah.
But then and she's very shy around new people. But
Mm.
with Emma kind of brings out the sort of adult in her a little bit by the end,
Mm.
and having to find maturity in losing something you love and in a mistake you've made, basically.
Mm.
But obviously, it's a movie that is kind of surrounded by controversy a little bit.
I was about to say this, yeah.
Obviously, I don't know the full story. Apparently, the director was very sort of forceful because obviously one of the most famous scenes from the movie is like the 10-minute, 15-minute sex scene, I believe.
Yeah.
And apparently, he was very adamant that it had to happen like this and very pushy towards the actresses. And also outside of that, every scene was rumored to be shot like hundreds of times in order to like basically torture the actresses.
Mm.
But the reason I still put it in is because it's celebrated because of the actresses. Like, it's a
Yeah.
fantastic film, but people always reward the actresses. Like, even the Palme d'Or was given like in honor of the actresses.
Yeah.
So I know, although very problematic the way treated as actresses, how they deal with it and how they project themselves on screen make this movie what it is. I think the best way to sort of see the movie is to celebrate it as two great
Yes.
performances, and that's exactly why I put it in the list.
Yes.
Outside of that, it's a fantastic narrative, but I think because of the problems, you have to use it as a celebration of 2 actresses who are absolutely phenomenal.
Mm.
And I'm very sad that Adele has not been in more movies. Well, of course she has,
Superb.
but there will be French movies, and it means less international acclaim.
Yeah.
Because she is absolutely perfect in it.
Absolutely.
I think I may have fallen in love when I watched it.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I don't blame. And we must. I know you mentioned the sex scene briefly there, but I did say to you after rewatching it, I do feel like, especially that first one, it is a bit too gratuitous in how much it shows. But I think to me, we could. It's definitely too long, but I feel like you need at least some form of sort of raw sexual scene between them, because you have the sequence where she has sex with the guy and there's just nothing there. You can there's no chemistry, there's no emotion, there's no intensity. I feel like you needed that scene. It does get too gratuitous, but I do think you needed something like that at least.
Yeah.
But let's move away from controversialness. Let's move on to 2014's Whiplash. So this is not going to be the only film from Damien Chazelle on this list, but this is the one that probably got him the acclaim that he now has.
Yeah, up until that point, I'd say 2014 was the best year of the 2010s. I mean, I think it was overtaken basically 2 years after. But you had movies like Whiplash and Birdman, and some other films that will appear on this list. But yeah, Whiplash was sort of the introduction of Damien Chazelle, and it's about a jazz drummer who gets the opportunity to play in one of the most prestigious bands in the city. But it turns out that the person running the band is quite intense, and essentially it's about how far you're willing to push yourself to achieve greatness. And it's performed phenomenally by J.K. Simmons and Miles Teller. And I think, for me, although the whole film is brilliant, I think the last 30 minutes is probably one of the best scenes in the past 20 years, 30 years.
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually. Quite interesting that you've got this and Black Swan, which both have sort of similar themes of trying to reach that absolute perfection, that absolute greatness, and then have this just outstanding finishing sequence. I feel like you need that to set the point home though, because they need to reach that perfection for the film to work. But I think Whiplash had, as you said, the last 30-20 minutes of Whiplash are so good. I do think people do forget how good the rest of the film is up to it. It's got such a kinetic pace to it. Like, I think it's only about 1 hour and 40, 1 hour 46, and it does not let up at all. It absolutely flies by. You know, it's not a very long film, but it absolutely flies by. It feels like it could be under an hour and a half because it's so kinetic. The pacing never lets up. It's like the music that they're playing. You know, the name Whiplash comes from the song that he's trying to play. It got an incredibly difficult drum section. And I think just like the music they're playing, there's just this incredible pace throughout that just does not ever let up. Even in the scenes that are just complete dialogue, I think that, like, there's that scene around the dinner table where he's got the family round and stuff. That is so snappy and so, yeah, it's just kinetic's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, I think especially in the sort of conversations, he manages to find this like intense way of writing and delivering dialogue as well. And obviously, the music scenes are pretty intense. But yeah, like you say, the conversations as well. He's got such a great pace to the movie. It never sort of slows down really. And yeah, I've got to say though, I still think, although the whole movie is brilliant, it feels like the last scene is just waves ahead of all of it,
Oh,
in my
absolutely.
opinion.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely. It's not like Black Swan, where Black Swan's really great and then has just a better ending. It is like a really great film with a clearly better last act.
yeah,
And it's so bizarre how tense it is that he's just playing music. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
all it is just playing music, but it's so tense.
I think it's down to J.K. Simmons as well in that scene
Yeah,
particularly. You know, this he obviously thinks that he's kind of embarrassed this Miles Teller
yeah.
by basically sending him on stage with basically no understanding of what's happening, and then Miles Teller turns it around, and J.K. Simmons, instead of getting angry, you know, it's that intensity and that realization of, oh my god, he's actually nailing it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, it doesn't.
and
He doesn't get there instantly, does it? It takes him a couple of minutes to realize
yeah,
what's good, because he walks over and he's like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And all that. They have that couple of minutes of J.K. Simmons being like, "What do I actually do here? How do I make it look like I'm not going to embarrass myself?" And then when he finally realizes what Miles Teller is actually doing and how he's going to get there, he helps him there as well. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean? There's that bit where he's sort of like telling him, he starts like orchestrating him again. And he's like, sort of bring it up, bring it up, bring it up, and then bring the band in. It's
yeah,
I just give me goosebumps thinking about it. It's so good.
yeah. Well, I mean, the next one slightly less intense, but yeah, it's Grand Budapest Hotel from the same year, 2014, directed by the one and only Wes Anderson. Um, and to me, you know, I said this in the article actually, was that Wes Anderson, you have to give him so much credit for consistency over the years, and it speaks like so much to the quality of the film as well to say that this is his best film.
Yeah, I think it's pretty high praise to say this is probably Wes Anderson's best, because he's such a distinct auteur as well. Like, his films have no one makes films like Wes Anderson. But I think one of the reasons why it is his best film is because it's so, and one of the reasons why it's on this list is because he's reaching much higher than any other film he's done. Like, he's got so many more moving pieces. He's got so many more characters. They span a much larger distance geographically as well, which I think is always a difficult thing for directors to do. You know, you have to balance all these different characters and all these different places, but you've also got to make this cohesive narrative out of it. There's a bit in the middle where Gustav goes to prison, and then for a little bit it almost becomes like a road movie. Do you know what I mean? For like a little bit, where he's like
Yeah,
jumping
yeah,
from point to point to point to point, and to be able to just put a small road section movie almost in the middle of a film like this, which has such a clear, distinct vision to it anyway, I think was pretty brave. But I mean, just like talking about having this amount of characters, he's got an incredible cast in this as well. Basically, anyone that's worked with Wes Anderson before is in this film, and then he adds a whole bunch of new people in it. I mean, this is quite an early performance. I say early performance, early breakout performance for Saoirse Ronan as well. She's absolutely brilliant in this. Even though she doesn't have that much time, it it balances Wes Anderson's amazing use of stop motion and slapstick and everything like that to just make, like, I don't know. It's just this is up until whatever else he does. For now, this is his magnum opus. This is I totally agree. It's his best film.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talk a lot about his style as well. I mean, I think as like there's not many directors that could pull off a movie that's about a writer telling the story of how two people in a hotel are telling another story.
Yeah,
Like,
that's such a Wes Anderson thing to do
yeah,
as well, isn't it?
but it works completely. It's that kind of charm of the movie, and I think at the time, obviously everyone was praising Ralph Fiennes, but I think people have started to forget just how good he is in that movie.
Yeah.
He's so funny, and I think that's down to Wes Anderson's writing as well. He doesn't just tell a visual story with the beautiful color palette. He can tell a story that is so funny. Like, it's been a long time. I think at the time it had been a long time since I'd like laughed out loud at a movie.
It's so funny as well.
That bit where he's in the prison and Zero comes to see him, and he's talking about that other prisoner trying to jump him or something like that. And then, like, the very posh and elegant Mr. Gustav refers to him as like a candy ass, and he says like beats his ass.
I think one of my favourite bits actually comes after that, and it's such a minor moment as well. I have such an affinity in this film for picking out, or any of his films really, just picking out the really funny little moments. It's the bit when he comes out of, I think it's the sewer, when he's broken out of prison, and he comes out, and Zero's just like, you're looking like Mr. Gustav has just sat there with his arms over the top of the sewer. Gustav's just looking at him. He's like, "Well, help me out," and he gets him out, and he's just like, "You smell atrocious," and he like has to spray himself with perfume and stuff like that. That just
yeah,
it's so funny. It's so
the other
funny.
bit that I remember, the other bit that really got me was when he's just stood in the hotel lobby with all the policemen, and he's like, "Oh, I can't remember the Tilda Swinton's character's name." And obviously, she dies. Spoiler. And he's sitting there, and he's like, "And you think I did it?" And he just pauses, and then he just sprints. He just sprints backwards up the stairs.
It's so funny. Funny.
It's so good at that sort of comedic timing, Ralph Fiennes. I didn't really expect that from him. He's very funny.
Absolutely. Yeah. Moving from one comedy to another, we're going on to Spotlight now.
Yeah. One of the best comedies of God. No, but in all seriousness.
Not a comedy.
No, it's definitely not a comedy. Directed by Tom McCarthy, who mostly known as an actor, but yeah, it tells the true story of the Spotlight team for the Boston Globe, uncovering the sort of conspiracy behind the paedophiles in the Catholic Church, and how the Catholic Church has gone out of their way to cover it up. And this is a movie that I love because it was reminiscent of All the President's Men. That idea that the story is so strong itself, and the way that it shoots its sort of like journalism is so real, so raw, that as we find out as much as the journalists do, it goes from like devastating to shocking, back to devastating. The writing is absolutely superb, and it's again some of the best performances you'll see as well.
I think one of my favorite aspects of it is that it doesn't even take like a moral high ground in the story. Like, it doesn't even try to paint, the paedophilic priests and as evil, terrible men. It's just telling the story, which I think is the best thing it could do, because I feel like you don't need to say a paedophile is an evil person.
Yeah.
I think we've all got a good enough moral compass to say, yes, paedophiles are terrible. So you don't need it jammed down your throat that they are. It's just telling you the story, and that happens so much as well. I can't remember who it is, but someone goes and knocks on the door of one of them as well, and she's talking to him about his experience, like why he did it, and like how the church covered it up, and then he starts admitting that he was touched as well, and almost uses that as a defense for doing it. He's like, well, I was molested as well, and then his wife brings him back in, and I just think it's moments like that where it's like, it's not trying to villainize them, because they're already pretty villainous, but it's just trying to show almost like the whole humanity in the story, not necessarily to sort of rid them of any guilt, but it's just trying to tell you the story, which I think is the most perfect way it could have done it.
Yeah, definitely. And on the flip side, it doesn't make the Spotlight team as like these massive heroes. You
Mm.
know, they're people who just like us deserve to know the story, and they are the ones that have found out the story. Um, and what I love is that they don't, see themselves as heroes, as people that have uncovered this. They start picking at sort of their own faults, with that whole thing when um, they realised that they got a lot of information like 10 years earlier.
Mm.
That list of names 10 years earlier, and they basically didn't do anything. It was brushed under the table. It's that kind of realization that you know it's not a heroic victory. This thing being released in the Globe, what it is a story that should have been known so many years earlier.
Yeah, I mean, Spotlight is obviously an amazing film, and it comes from an amazing year too. We said 2014 was really great, but 2015 is amazing. Another amazing film from the year was Mad Max Fury Road. And I mean, I don't think it's controversial to say it's one of the best action films of not just this decade, but the 21st century, maybe ever. But that's an argument to get into another time. But um, when you try and pin down the story of Mad Max, it's basically just one really long chase sequence. They get to a point and then they come back, and that's basic. I mean, you could throw in everything else, but if you were to boil it down simplistically, it's drive to point A, turn around, and go back to where you originally came from. And if you said that and then said it's probably the best car chase sequence of all time, um, it would be hard to persuade someone unless they actually see it, because the thing that Mad Max Fury Road does so well is that visually it's absolutely outstanding. Not just in the way it's shot and the colors and everything, but it's almost entirely practical car effects. So one thing that the director George Miller does perfectly is he shot it in a massive wide open desert with as many cars as he possibly could, blew things up left, right, and center, and then used CGI to create mountains and ravines and stuff like that, and create a really interesting background. But because you're not focusing on the background, you're focusing on the cars. You're not picking up that you've got tons of CGI on the screen because it's behind you.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the best thing for me was just how he visually told the story as well through the action.
Mm.
It's not just about an action part. They slow down slightly. They start talking. That's where the story goes. He is able to tell the story, a very simple story, mind, but it's still very effective. He manages to tell a story through a car chase,
Mm.
and that's kind of why you can make the argument for it being one of the best action movies of all time. And I think a lot of people, I've heard a lot of people, brush it off saying, "Well, it's just a car chase," but I mean, how many other movies have you seen that have the ability to do that?
Yeah.
None, basically.
I think what's interesting as well, we keep saying it's a simple story, but if you were to start delving into it, it does become pretty layered, because you've got this quite interesting sort of dissection of testosterone driven sort of macho competition to take over the sort of patriarchy. You have Immortan Joe at the top, and I know that Max himself isn't trying to take over the reins, but you've got this macho testosterone stuff all swirling around, and then at the center of it, what you've got is Charlize Theron trying to get these women. I can't remember what the terminology that Joe uses for the women, but they're essentially just like breeding apparatus for him. He's just using them for more babies. And she's just getting these women out and trying to get them away. And then you have that really interesting bit when they get to that point where they turn around, where they meet these more free women. And they realize it's no better out here than where it actually is back there. So they need to make it better, back at this sort of complex that Joe's got. I just think it's, if you want to start delving into it, there is a lot to analyze, but at the same time, it's just an immensely fun action film.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's just so. I guess full throttle. I don't really like using this term, but Full Throttle is literally the best way to describe it. Like, it's just
Yeah,
absolutely non-stop. And
yeah,
I
absolutely.
know that it does take that kind of small break where there's that realization that this place they've been, dreaming of is not what they expect, so they need to turn around. But it's an important part of the movie, and
Yeah.
the audacity to have a car with a guitarist, like, with fire coming out at the end. It's just so, like, it should be so corny, but it's not. It's just
It just doesn't.
perfect.
It just doesn't. And I think just as like a point to put on the end there as well, from an editor's point of view, especially the early sequences, they are so well edited. I mean, the whole film is superbly edited, but there's really early sequences where Max has been captured and he's trying to escape from what does Joe call the I was going to call them war boys, but I think that's what they're called in the game rather than the film. But anyway, his children, I guess. Um, he's trying to escape them, and there's this really really beautiful technique of um, removing frames periodically, not just randomly, just removing frames here and there, and it just gives this really really tense sporadic sort of feel to it as he's running away, like this panicked feel to it as he's running away. I just think it's so such an original way to, because I think people can sometimes forget that you can use other elements outside of just performance and directing. You can use cinematography and editing and sound to in the most original ways, to make your film even better. So we mentioned how good 2015 actually was. So we're going to chuck in our first animation here, which was Inside Out, which is probably one of Pixar's, if not Pixar's best, animated features. And I don't know, Corey, do you want to talk about why it's so good? No, I know how much you love this film, so.
Well, I mean, you say probably Pixar's best. I would say it is. I will. We've had many a conversation about this. Um, I think for me, it's something that's kind of because I've rewatched it in the past maybe a couple of months, I think. Um, and I would say the thing that stands out the most for me is that I know that Pixar have always managed to do this sort of, um, you know, film for all ages kind of thing, and it's worked. It's worked for them since the first Toy Story. But for me, this movie is actually far more aimed at kids, but they find humor for the adults. And the reason it works so well is because it's teaching kids such an important lesson. I mean, I think while all of Pixar's films thematically are great, I think this one's one of the most important. Teaching kids that it's okay to be sad, and that it's basically not healthy to sort of jumble and bottle up all this emotion. That it's okay to release and let yourself be sad, and I think that's why for me it's the best, in my opinion. I'm sure we'll have another discussion about that another day. But
Maybe, but I think one thing that I love about it so much is that although it's done in such a skillful like way, it does feel like so quite a lot of Pixar has this really really good way of making like maturely creating a film that feels like it's a child's idea. It's like when you say with Toy Story, the idea of the toys coming to life when they're not about, to me, sounds like something a kid would come up with. And this idea of Inside Out, of having these little people in your head that are the ones that control your emotions, they feel like, things that kids would think up, but then they take it in such a mature filmmaking way and just make this incredible just incredible piece of cinema out of it. And it's funny to say that a film about emotions is emotional, um, but it definitely is. Like as you say, it teaches this incredibly important lesson that happiness isn't the only important emotion, you know, um, and that's something that Joy has to learn from this. That she isn't be all and end all. You have to have everything else in there as well. And yeah, I think it's beautifully animated. It's super original. As we say, there's many films, and we're going to say this again and again. It's just incredibly original, and I it's definitely one of the best animations of the decade, if not the best animation of the decade. And I just think it's just a fantastic. It's short as well. I mean, like animations aren't long, but this clocks in at just over an hour and a half, and the amount of themes and like just the length of the narrative that it manages to cram in this time is just pretty superb filmmaking.
Yeah, I think also like the way they build the world, like inside the brain as well.
Yeah,
It's just very intriguing. It does feel quite light, but that's why, parents can appreciate it, because that kind of layout, the way they lay out Riley's mind, is just with all the things from like preschool and stuff like that. The way
yeah,
Joy interacts with her memories, um, it's just sort of such a beautifully paced film as well. And like I said, it is my favourite Pixar,
yeah. No,
and I still.
I don't think there's like there are a couple of films I think you could throw in for contention, but I don't think anyone will be angry at you for saying this. So I was just going to move on to the next one here because we talked about 2014 being a great year, 2015 is a great year. Now probably the one that's going to be in contention here is 2016. We actually have 5 films from 2016 in this list, and should we talk about the first one, which actually won Best Picture? No, not La La Land. It was Moonlight. And what I think is interesting about Moonlight is that we were talking about Place Beyond the Pines earlier, and Blue is the Warmest Colour having these sort of distinct sort of segmented narratives. But Moonlight does it in a way that like especially when you compare it to Blue is the Warmest Colour, what segments are what. It's quite a hard film to define exactly how to sort of like talk about the narrative, because it takes 3 really, really distinct segments of this guy's life as he's coming to terms with his sexuality. There's quite a lot of, I think something that this decade has done excellently is bring LGBT plus sort of themes and topics into the mainstream, because they've always been there, but it's now coming to a point where these are now winning Best Pictures and winning Palme d'Or, and we'll come to another film later that also won an Oscar. But it's a groundbreaking film. It's I sometimes struggle to talk about it because it almost doesn't feel like a film sometimes because of the way it sort of presents itself, but it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautifully shot. The colors are just so like these sort of almost neon like colors just absolutely just flood the screen, and it's just absolutely stunning. And what a performance from Mahershala Ali as well. I mean, he's only on screen for about 10-15 minutes, and he won the supporting actor Oscar, and rightfully so, because he almost steals the entire film, and he's only in it for a brief section in the middle.
I would say as well, it's my favourite part of the movie is just, uh, that kind of, his job is a drug dealer, and I quite like that it's sort of in the, it is about later on it is about him, discovering his sexuality, but early on it's about a kid who's doesn't have really a parental figure. I know he has a mother, but she's not a particularly good mother. And she's not a mother without problems. So he kind of has to make his own way in a way, and I think it's a beautiful relationship that Mahershala Ali, this someone who's a drug dealer that comes with danger, and and when you see it in a movie as well, that's all you see usually. But now it's kind of this really tender sort of fatherly, I guess, life teaching is the right way to say it, and it's such a beautiful thing to show, and that's why Mahershala Ali is so good in it as well. He's both. You can understand that he's a drug dealer by the way he holds himself, but the way he like sort of playfully talks with the kid and makes jokes and stuff, he's obviously a very decent guy, and I think that's why his performance is so good. And I always used to get when it first came out, I got a bit confused because I thought it was sort of based on Barry Jenkins, but it's not. It's based on the screenwriter, I believe. I think it's based on a play.
Yeah.
So I was a bit confused at first, but it's also a very important sort of representation of black people as well. And
Absolutely.
it's such an important. Like I know that we'll go on to talk about La La Land and how much we love it, but I think it did for what it represents as well. I think it was a good win for the movie.
I think we've said this before. Yeah, I'll make no mistake that how much I love La La Land, but there's no doubting that Moonlight is the more important film. Like it definitely holds more importance than La La Land does. And I mean, just to think that this is Barry Jenkins' directorial feature debut as well is just ridiculous. The fact that this, I just sometimes when you just watch a film and you just think, how have you made so little but make something so good? Um,
Yeah, I think I don't know if you've seen If Beale Street Can Talk, but his second film, I think that's got that similar sort of tenderness to it. I wouldn't say it's not as good as Moonlight, otherwise it'd be on this list. But um, no, Moonlight is just such a, I don't know. It feels like a tender dissection of a lot of different kinds of people, and they sort of managed to put it all into one beautiful character that represents a lot. Um, but they also make it very personal, and I just think it's balanced beautifully. The three the three different parts in time, just they don't. It doesn't feel jolting ever.
no, no.
It's just so smooth all the way through. It's such a beautiful movie. I love it.
Absolutely. So we might as well use this sort of next time to then talk about La La Land, um, which it's a film that just hits me in such a way that is almost indescribable. Like the way it resonates with me is, um, we've used the term before of movie magic about like how sometimes a film just does a thing that is almost indescribable. Um, and for me, La La Land is 2 hours and 8 minutes of pure movie magic. It just, I mean, we're both huge fans of Golden Age Hollywood and old Hollywood musicals, but it just resonates in a way that just like it brings musical back in the best way possible. I think one reason why I came out the first time watching it in the theater, and I came out and just thought, this is like just so gobsmacked is that I knew it was a musical, but I've been so used to seeing just shit musicals, basically, High School Musical and Mamma Mia and stuff like that. I've been so used to seeing those coming out in recent years that seeing one that is genuinely very, very good was pretty shocking and pretty. But I don't. Emma Stone won the Best Actress for her role. Ryan Gosling, I don't even think he got nominated for his performance. He's not
He
as
was
good.
nominated.
Was he nominated? Yeah, I don't. He's not
Yeah,
as good as Emma Stone, but together they have some of the best on-screen chemistry. As I say, this is absolutely Gosling's decade. He's been just outstanding in this. It just it's one of the most romantic films as well, which is funny to say because you've got Blue as the Warmest Color in the same decade. But it's one of the most romantic. It's one of the most affecting endings as well. Chazelle has this way of making such a deeply impactful and emotional ending to his films. So Whiplash has the incredible on stage sequence. This has the sequence where you see what could have happened between Gosling and Stone, and then First Man has the just astounding moon landing sequence. He has such a way to end his films. He's got an incredible way of creating a third act. Yeah, and I'm deeply fully in love. It's beautifully choreographed. It's beautifully shot. Yeah, I could gush about this film for a very long time.
I think surprisingly though, this is the movie that I've had to stand and defend the most. Um, like especially when talk to other people about people who like movies. They're obviously not as on board with it as, but the whole world seemed to be against this movie by the time it got to the Oscars. But the way I describe to people, to go back to what you said about bringing that sort of golden age musical back, is the way I say it is it has the magic of that, but it kind of matures it and is just even more technically gifted than they are.
Mm.
So I think that's really important. And I know it takes a lot of influence from Umbrellas of Cherbourg, but you watched both of them, and they're two completely different films, both beautiful in their own ways. And Chazelle has just emerged as this just uber original director, and I know that obviously you like First Man as well,
Yeah.
and it is a fantastic film. But yeah, I agree with you. There was something about La La Land. I think me and you were affected quite heavily by this movie when we first
Mm.
watched it.
I think Chazelle has such a great way of He just has such control of what you're seeing and hearing. He knows exactly what he wants to make. He's probably the perfect example of how an auteur can actually be. So there's like no trepidation in his work. There's no times where you ever think he's doubting himself. Yeah, and I just think, yeah, it's. I think it's probably my favourite film of the decade. Not necessarily saying it's the best. There's too many great films in this decade, I think, to pick one. But it's my favourite, and it's the one I saw it 5 times in cinema, I think. Yeah, I think it's an incredible thing to see on the big screen as well.
Yeah, it's a very cinematic sort of experience, and I agree with you about Chazelle. I think it's just so incredible to see a director that's just so in charge of his vision and can visualize his movie that includes everything, like story and sound and the camera. I think it feels like it takes that extra step to be great,
I think
and not many movies do that anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think saying like what you're saying about how he's in control of his craft so much is that the way he uses music is really great too. Because something that musicals, like subpar musicals, will do is they'll use music for the sake of making a catchy song, whereas the songs in La La Land are great, but they narratively make sense as well. You feel like there's a reason why that song is being used there. Like you feel like the point is being emphasized better by a song than it would by talking.
Yeah,
which I think is really important. It's so brilliantly done. Yeah,
especially the end as well. That sort of what could have been sort of thing. I think that's just the perfect example of if they just you can't have them say that. You need to see that through this really extravagant and beautiful musical number. And one thing I just want to give a shout out to Emma Stone for the audition song.
Yes.
Because
that won her the Oscar. Let's be honest.
Yeah, she absolutely nails that. Not just in singing, but she's just so vulnerable during that scene as well. So she's almost starts light-hearted, and then she just turns into this vulnerable, beautiful. Almost, it has the beauty of a monologue essentially, but she is singing, and that's why I love it so much. She's so good in that, and I think that scene alone, she deserved an Oscar to me.
Absolutely. She tells so much emotion on her face. Like being able to sing and then also tell the story in your face, because a lot of the opening of that sequence is a really big close up on her face as she's singing at the at the people sort of taking this audition. So it's not just the story that you're listening to, but it's a story you're seeing her perform as well. But she's only performing with her face while singing. There's a lot going on. It's very complex, and she just does it perfectly. All right, well, that concludes the first 10 of our best of the 2010s. We're going to go into the next 10, which is more of 2016, because it's just the best year of the 2010s. I hope you enjoyed. You have to let us know whether or not you think, you agree with our list so far, whether you think we've made any glaring omissions up until this point. Make sure you check us out on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. We're all at Real Reviewing, realreviewing.com. We're on Apple Podcasts, the Google Podcasts. If you go to anchor.fm/Real Reviewing, you can find everything that we're on, YouTube and everything like that. Okay. You can find me on Twitter at Philson Wilson.
And you can find me at Cosp Jord.
I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Thanks very much.
Bye.